Material facts and stigmatized properties represent one of the most critical sections of the national portion of the real estate exam because they involve the legal and ethical boundaries of disclosure. A material fact is defined as any information that would likely influence a reasonable person's decision to purchase a property or impact the price they are willing to pay for it. This is a broad definition, and for exam purposes, you should assume that anything affecting the physical condition, the legal status of the title, or the surrounding environment is material. One of the most frequent ways this concept appears on the test is through questions about latent defects. These are hidden physical problems that are not discoverable by a standard visual inspection. If a seller knows that the underground sewer line is collapsed or that the attic has a history of mold growth that was simply painted over, these are latent material facts. The exam expects you to know that both the seller and the listing agent have a duty to disclose known latent defects, even if the property is being sold in as-is condition. Do not let the phrase "as is" trick you on the test, because it does not waive the requirement to disclose known material defects. It only means the seller will not pay for repairs. Stigmatized properties represent a different challenge. These are homes where a non-physical event occurred that might make the property less desirable for certain buyers. Common examples include a homicide, a suicide, or claims that the house is haunted. The national exam will often test your knowledge of how disclosure laws vary for these psychological stigmas. Generally speaking, if an event does not affect the physical structure or the title, it may not be considered a material fact by law in many jurisdictions. However, the exam often includes a scenario where a buyer asks a direct question about a stigma. You must remember that you can never commit fraud or misrepresentation. If you are asked directly about a death on the property, you cannot lie. Your response must be truthful, or you must state that you are not authorized by your client to answer, though the latter often signals an issue to the buyer. You should also be aware of how environmental hazards like lead-based paint or radon are treated. These are almost always considered material facts. Specifically for the national exam, remember the lead-based paint disclosure law of 1992, which requires disclosure for any residential property built before 1978. This is a mandatory material fact disclosure, regardless of whether a seller thinks it is an issue or not. An agent's failure to disclose a material fact can lead to charges of misrepresentation or even fraud, and the exam will often ask you to identify the specific type of misrepresentation involved. Negligent misrepresentation occurs when an agent should have known a fact was material and failed to disclose it, whereas intentional misrepresentation happens when the agent purposefully hides the truth to close a deal. To help you remember the scope of material facts, use the phrase, "If it affects the bones or the bucks, it is material." This mental shortcut reminds you that anything impacting the structure of the house or the financial value and liability of the owner requires disclosure. Another common trap involves the disclosure of neighborhood nuisances. If there is a planned zoning change or a noisy airport expansion nearby, these are considered material facts because they affect the value and use of the land. When you are taking the exam, always ask yourself if the information would make a typical buyer walk away or offer less money. If the answer is yes, it is material and disclosure is mandatory. Stigmas are the exception where state law fluctuates, but physical and legal defects are never optional.